you're gonna loop it. If you need a tutorial on how to loop your strap, let me know and I can do the whole breakdown. And then what we want to do is place it to where it will allow our knees to be hip width distance apart with support. So I know that this is kind of a little funky, but basically you're going to take your loop and you're going to slide it over the feet onto the legs. And then I'm going to stand up to show you. You don't have to stand up though. We basically want it to be wide enough to where our feet, our knees, our hip width distance. So mine needs to be a little tighter. You're going to place it on your thighs. And I like my loop to be right in the middle of the thighs. So that way the loop, the metal part, is not on top of the thigh because that can be really uncomfortable. And then have a block in arm's reach. We don't need it quite yet. You'll slide the strap once you're seated to the space right below your knees on your thighs, and then go ahead and lie down. Plant the feet on the floor, hip width distance. Relax your arms by the sides of the body. And you can let your legs get heavy to where the strap is supporting the legs. Or if your legs relaxed means the strap is just kind of hanging out and it's not really doing anything, that's fine too, for now. We'll soften the gaze or close the eyes and take a big breath in through the nose and out the mouth. 2 more like that. So big breath in and audible exhale. And 1 more big inhale. Maybe you pause at the top of this inhale and just sip in a little bit more breath. And then exhale to let it go. Now start to move into a nice, long, steady rhythm. So long breath in and long breath out. Walk your heels closer to the sit bones or towards your hips. Again, making sure the feet are about hip width distance apart. You're going to first keep your pelvis relaxed on the ground, but we're going to tilt the pelvis so it feels kind of like a little baby cat and cow type movement. So again, pelvis stays on the ground, but with your next exhale, draw the low part of the abdomen in towards the low back and feel your tailbone scoop a little bit more towards the ceiling, kind of like you're trying to round the low back. So abdominal muscles engaged, tailbone scoops towards the ceiling. And then start to move into the opposite where your sit bones reach down towards the mat. Your low back is going to arch away from the floor. So this is just really tilting the pelvis into a posterior tilt. You're going to scoop the tailbone towards the ceiling, low belly, abdominal muscles engage. And then anterior tilt, where you let your sit bones drop down towards the mat, your low back arches away from the mat. Just do a few more rounds like that with your breath. As you do this movement, you might notice that one particular tilt feels better for the low back. Like for Linda, the scooping of the tailbone might feel better because that's creating more stretch around the low back. And for Susan, letting the sit bones drop heavy to the floor and feeling the low back arch might feel better because it's contracting the muscles of the low back, which hugs in around the sacrum. So it's all relative, right, to your body needs. So now just come into like a neutral position. You're neither scooping the tailbone or arching the low back. Press the shoulders down into the floor. Maybe press your palms down. And then we're gonna push into the feet and lift the hips just a few inches. And then thanks to the strap, you probably won't have to work too hard to keep your knees hugging in. And just take an inhale. And then with the exhale, lower the hips back down. Now we're going to come back into that bridge, but as you lift up, I want you to scoop your tailbone towards the ceiling. Feel your low belly hug in, and then lift your pelvis just 2 inches. And you might stay there if you're enjoying that sensation in the low back. Or if you want to lift higher, you're going to create a little arch in the low back, push into the feet, and then lift your hips a few more inches. And with the exhale, lower all the way back down. So do that 3 times with your breath. Use an inhale to rise. So you can either scoop the tailbone and just lift a few inches and pause, or if you want to move more into a back bend, you're going to allow your low back to arch a bit as you lift your pelvis higher. Use your exhale to lower all the way back down. 2 more times with your own breath. And with the final exhale, come all the way back down. Now stretch your arms overhead with the palms facing up. If this feels a little tight for the shoulders, take your arms more into a V shape, like a wide V. You'll draw the low belly in and then lift the heels. And that might be enough to feel the abdominal muscles engage. If you want to pick up the feet, feel free. You can hover both feet above the ground, feeling the core muscles engage. And then option to extend the legs up towards the ceiling. You might roll the ankles to wake up the feet. Then we're going to start to engage the outer hip muscles. So we'll all extend the legs up towards the ceiling. Let your feet go wide so that your legs are held by your strap. And if this is a little too intense for the hamstrings, bend your knees or the back of the legs. If you're feeling too much of a stretch there, bend the knees. So you're going to take your legs and push out into the strap. And of course, the strap is going to create some resistance. And you might start to feel the outer hip muscles engage. And you'll take a long breath there. And then soften that, so don't push any longer. And then just bend the knees and release the feet back down. Push into the feet, come up into a little bridge. Take an inhale. Exhale to come all the way back down. Pause for the breath in. Then pick up the feet and extend the legs up towards the ceiling. Take the legs and push out into the strap so you feel your outer hip muscles engage. If you find that your low back is really flat to the floor, bend the knees and try to find the natural curve of the low back, which arches away from the floor. Take one more breath. Good. And then bring the legs all the way together. You can unloop your strap as your legs reach up towards the ceiling. Of course, if it's too much for the hamstrings, you can bend your knees. And you're just going to put the strap to the side. And now we're going to give in to gravity. So you're going to take your legs a little wider, until you start to feel the stretch of the inner hips. And if it's too much, resist gravity. So you start to feel the engagement of the inner hips. Now bend the knees. You're going to let your heels come in towards your sit bones. Reach your arms in between and wrap the hands around the front of the shins or the front of the kneecap, your choice. So think of this kind of like Baddha Konasana or bound angle pose. Just take a long breath here. And then we'll sweep the hands to the outside of the knees and help those knees close. Bring them back together. Take your arms out into a T or bent elbows, kind of like cactus shape or gold post shape. And we're not moving into a deep twist, but you're going to take your knees and rock them side to side. So there's a little twist that's happening as the knees go to the side. Good. Well, when you're ready, you're going to take your knees all the way over to the right. And you're going to pause, whether that's halfway or the knees come down. Be really mindful if this is too much for the low back. Take a long breath in. And then with your exhale, pick up the left knee, then the right, come back to center. Pause for the inhale. And take the knees over to the left, whether you're pausing halfway and you're using core, or you bring your knees closer to the ground. If you're hovering, the closer to the ground you get, the more you have to engage your core, right? So if it's too much, you can pick the knees up. And we'll pick up the right knee, then the left to come back to center. Plant the feet on the floor. Take your feet as wide as the mat. And just do a little bit of windshield wiping. Take the knees side to side. Now we'll let the knees go all the way over to the right, and then you're just going to roll onto your right side. Use your left hand to help push yourself all the way up. Yeah, now you might grab your blanket and you could set it up so that it's padding underneath your knees. Because we're going to come into a tabletop position. So hands underneath the shoulders and knees underneath the hips. Now there's always an option if your wrists don't enjoy weight-bearing postures like this tabletop. You can take your blocks on the tallest height and place your elbows on the blocks to give your wrists a break. So just know at any point you can take this variation to give your wrists a bit of a break. We're going to take our hips and just move the pelvis side to side. As you do this, you're kind of arching the rib cage, right, side to side. And then we'll bring the hips back to center. Take the right leg and extend it back behind you. Tuck the toes under. And now do a little movement forward and back. So you're kind of pushing back through the heel. You might feel a stretch in the calf or the sole of the foot. And then when you're ready, you're gonna take that right leg and sweep it out to the side, straight out to the side, kind of like an airplane wing extending out from the pelvis. Now this movement is much smaller. You're gonna take your hips back just an inch or two and then forward. And then back an inch or two and then forward. Yeah, that's it. Then we'll shift forward so the shoulders are stacked over the elbows or the wrists. And I invite you to get up a little higher. So you might come to the tips of the fingers, or if you have your blocks, you're gonna come all the way up, hands on top of the blocks. So up to you, whether you keep your hands on the ground or on your blocks. Yeah, so now we're gonna do some movement to open up the inner hip here. So I want you to make sure that your thigh, your knee, and your shin always stay in line. You're gonna push the right heel down, flex the foot so your toes lift. And these movements are small. You're gonna rotate your thigh, knee, shin, and toes up towards the ceiling and then back down. And then up towards the ceiling and back down. Yeah, and so I'm doing a bigger movement just so I can kind of illustrate what we're doing, but you can keep this movement small, like an inch, right? Because you'll notice when the thigh rotates up towards the ceiling, it's a much bigger opening for the inner hip or those adductor muscles, right? So the movement can be so small, and that's great because you're still starting to work on the mobility of the hip. All right, so next time the foot comes flat to the floor, you're gonna bend the knee a little bit and heel toe your foot all the way around towards your right hand or your right block, wherever you are. Yeah. Now for me, my right hip wants to stick up quite a bit. So we all wanna think about letting this right hip drop down a little bit to level the pelvis. And now these movements are gonna be small too. You're gonna take your pelvis and allow it to go forward and down just a tiny bit. Yeah, and then when the pelvis goes back, you might bend your elbows an inch. Then you straighten the arm as the pelvis goes forward and down. You bend your elbows. So for all of the synovial joints, movement is like lubrication. It's kind of moving the joint in a way that creates a bit more mobility. You can think of like a door hinge without a lot of movement. It can kind of get rusty over time and then a little squeaky. All right, so next time you move your hips back, you're just gonna take your right knee back to meet the left. And then rock your hip side to side. Before we do the other side, we're gonna give our knees a little bit of a break. So let's come off of the blocks. Move your blanket to the side. And then lower all the way down to the abdomen. Walk your elbows forward so they're underneath the shoulders. So you're in a Sphinx pose with forearms pressing down, elbows underneath the shoulders. You'll move into a little bit of a back bend here, just drawing your chest forward through the frame of the arms. We'll take one long breath here. Then we'll slide the left arm forward, overhead. Bring the right hand back next to the rib cage. Push into the right hand and roll all the way over onto your left side. Stack the right leg on top of the left. And then just check in. If this feels a little constricted for your left shoulder or your neck, you can take your blanket and place it between the arm and the head. So it's like a little pillow. And we'll pick the right leg up to hover. Actively reach through the right heel. So you feel the right hip moves away from the right shoulder and the whole side of your body is just a tiny bit longer. I like to use my right hand for support. I just kind of place it right in front of the chest. Yeah. Now you're going to bend the right knee and open it towards the ceiling. So if you know tree pose or vrikshasana, this is like a side lying tree pose, but we're going to hover the right foot instead of bringing it to the left leg. Good. Now we're going to do a little bit of movement here. So you're going to lower your knee down out in front of you, and this might just be a few inches because you'll start to feel your outer hip muscles engage as you're resisting gravity. And then slowly extend the right leg straight to hover over your left leg. Then bend the right knee, take the knee towards the ceiling. It's kind of almost like a circle here. You lower the knee down out in front of you. And then you extend the leg straight to hover over the left. Now, if you want to challenge your balance, you can float your right arm up to the ceiling. You're going to bend the right knee, open the knee towards the ceiling. This is where it gets tricky. You're going to lower the right knee down out in front of you. Ooh, you've got to use your left leg to stabilize. Extend the right leg straight to hover over the left. And then last time, bend the right knee and take it towards the ceiling. Pause here. And maybe start to straighten the right leg a little bit. Could be where the shin is parallel to the ceiling. Could be more diagonal. Could be the sole of the foot, as if it's flat on the ceiling. Yeah, and then just re-bend the right knee. Bring your right hand in front of the chest. Right leg meets the left. Let your leg get heavy for a second. So the right leg is just laying on top of the left. Pause for a breath. Then we'll use the right hand for support. I'm going to roll to the abdomen. Slide the hands back next to the ribs. If you want to move into a little cobra pose, you can lift the chest. And lower back down. Push down into the knees and the hands to lift yourself up. Maybe press the hips back for a child's pose. Then we'll shift forward. Coming back into our tabletop, you want to set yourself up so you can take your blanket underneath your knees. If you're giving your wrists a break, you'll grab your blocks on the tallest height and place them underneath the elbows. Then we start off by taking the left leg back. Tuck the toes under. And do just a little pulse forward and back. Stretching the calf, the Achilles tendon, the sole of the foot. And the next time you stack the shoulders over the wrists, we'll sweep the left leg out to the side. Now these pulses are going to be much smaller, might just be an inch forward and back. And then here's where you probably want to lift yourself up. So you'll stack the shoulders over the elbows or the wrist, and then you can either come to the fingertips or you're going to grab your blocks any height to lift up. So the reason I mentioned the thigh, the knee, and the shin need to stay in line is we may find that the hip can only rotate so far, right? Because the inner hip may be tight. But if we allow, the shin and the foot will continue to rotate, and that can really put some pressure, some torque on the knee. So you only want to go as far as the thigh bone, the shin, and the toes can stay in line. So we'll push the heel down, lift the sole of the foot, so you're flexing the foot, and then it's a very subtle rotation where the thigh opens towards the ceiling, and then we call this internal rotation where the thigh points forward again. And really, it's just the femur bone, the thigh bone, is rotating in the pelvis, which to rotate externally, to open, means we're asking that inner hip, the adductor muscles, to lengthen. So this movement can be an inch or more. Okay, next time the sole of the foot comes down, you'll bend the knee and start to heel toe the foot around. So we're in our lunge and the foot is to the outside of the hand or the block. Yeah. Good. Now here, let your pelvis go forward and down an inch. And then back, and maybe put a little bit in the elbows. Then you straighten the arms, the pelvis moves forward and down. You bend the elbows. Yeah. This is called lizard pose, this wide lunge. And there's actually 2 variations of lizard, and we're doing both. So one variation, the pelvis goes forward and down, and that's a little bit more about the right hip flexors or the front of the thigh and your inner hip. And when the pelvis goes back and we fold a little with the torso, you may experience it in a completely different area of the hip. All right, so next time the hips start to go back, take your left knee to meet the right. Rock your hips side to side. Make sure that the knees and the feet are hip width distance apart. Come up to your fingertips. Push down into the shins and come up to kneeling. Good. Sweep your arms out and up. Big inhale here. And then with your exhale, just lean a tiny bit to your right. I'm going to mirror you. Then inhale to center and exhale to the left. Yeah, use your core to stabilize. Then back to center. Now bring the hands to the heart. Think of this as our chair pose. You're going to hinge back with your hips as the torso leans forward a little bit. And if it's too much for your knees, just bring your pelvis a little more forward so you're upright, right? So really pay attention to what's safe for the knees here. You're probably starting to feel your thigh muscles, your quads engage. We'll take one more breath. And then release the hands down. You can walk the hands forward a little bit. Let's move the blanket out of the way. You'll shift forward like your modified plank. Pause for an inhale. And then exhale to lower down. Come to the abdomen. Take your right arm and extend it overhead. You're going to roll to your right side. And then again, stacking left leg on top of the right. Check in. Maybe you want some support for your head. You'll slide the blanket in between your right ear and your arm. Place the left hand in front of the chest for support, then pick up your left leg to hover. Actively reach through the left heel. So just hovering the leg here. It's very similar to what we did with the strap, where we kind of pushed out into the strap. You're engaging the outer hip muscles. Now bend the knee and open the knee towards the ceiling like tree pose. Yeah. Good. So we're going to do those slow, it's kind of like a circle, right? So we'll lower the knee down in front of the torso. Then you'll extend your left leg straight to hover over the right. Bend the knee, take it up towards the ceiling. Lower the knee, straight out from the hip in front of the body. Extend the leg straight to hover. Do that 2 more times. Good. Now this next time, you open the knee towards the ceiling, pause. You might lift the foot so that your shin is parallel to the ceiling. And that might be plenty. You might float your left arm up. So you're using your core to stabilize. Maybe you extend the left leg a little bit more. Take a breath wherever you are. Good. Now challenge is to keep the arm up, right? You're really having to stabilize with the core rather than using your left hand. Rebend the left knee. Start to lower the knee down out from the front of the body. Extend the leg straight to hover over the right. Actively reach through the heel. Then bring your left hand down in front of the chest. Release your left leg so it's just relaxed on top of the right. And pause for a breath. Great. Now push into the left hand so you can roll to your abdomen. You'll move your blanket out of the way and bring the elbows directly underneath your shoulders for your Sphinx pose. Use your arms to just encourage the heart to move forward. And then we'll turn the elbows out. You're going to stack your hands. Let your forehead rest on the stacked hands. Bend the knees. Do a little movement with the legs, maybe windshield wiping the legs side to side. And then bring the legs back to center and release them down. Slide the hands next to the ribs. You're going to press into your child's pose. And with your next inhale, start to walk your hands back and roll it up 1 vertebrae at a time. Now, if it's not comfortable to sit on the heels, no need to go there. We're basically just going to grab the blanket and roll it up this time. So you want to roll it up. And if you have a bolster, you can also use the bolster for this. And so basically, we're going to lay the blanket in front of us to where when we lower down, the blanket's going to go right underneath the low part of the abdomen, and we're going to come back into our Sphinx pose. And the way to tell if the blanket is in the right place is we're using the blanket to lift the abdomen and therefore the internal organs, right? And then what you might feel is a little bit more space in the low back, like the low back might feel broad. And you get to decide if you want to stay here in Sphinx, and the blanket can kind of aid in creating space in the low back as you lift your chest and emphasize the back bend, or if you want more space in the low back, more of a stretch, you could turn your elbows out and let your forehead rest on your stacked hands. So your choice. And we'll stay here for 3 full breaths. Now, if you chose the back bend and you want to move into that back bend a little bit more, you're gonna bend your knees. And you'll engage your glute muscles and pull the heart forward by way of your forearms pushing into the floor. So last breath wherever you are. But if the knees are bent, release the legs back down. If the elbows are out, start to walk the elbows back in. Push into the forearms. Pause for a breath. Then we'll lower the torso a few inches so we can slide the hands back next to the ribs. You're going to push up and into your child's pose again. You can move your blanket to the side. Take a full round of breath there. Then we'll roll it up. We're going to come to kneeling one last time. So if you want your support, slide the blanket underneath your knees. Take the knees hip width distance and then push up to kneeling. So just move the hips side to side. We're going to combine what we were doing with the hips and the lateral stretch in a posture that's called gate pose or Parigasana. So the first variation without the legs is to take the arms up and then go over to your right. That's it. And then you'll just bring your right hand down to the hip. You try to lift up through the side and focus a little bit more on the lateral or the side body stretch. Keep the core engaged because there's a tendency to kind of move into a back bend here, which will really compress the low back. Good, and then come to center. We'll just move into the opposite side. So now left hand to the left hip, right arm goes up, lift up through the sides and move into your lateral. That's it, good. And then come back to center. So you can do that again, or you can add the legs to open up the hip. If you're not feeling so stable, you can bring your hands down first to take your right leg out, because basically we're going to shift weight into the left shin, and the right leg is going to go out to the side. Yeah, and you'll find that when the sole of the foot is down, there's a bit more stability, right? But it may feel a little restricted in this hip, or maybe you want to add the hip opener, which is what we did here, right, where we rotate the leg. So option to push the heel down, flex the foot, and then again, remember thigh, knee, shin, and toes all in line. You may be slightly diagonal, you may be more towards the ceiling, just don't force it. Then add the arms, inhale. Now with your exhale, move into a baby lateral. Keep this small because since we're taking the weight over the leg, it's adding a little bit more of a force, right? So small. Make sure the knee is micro bent, especially if your toes are pointing up. Take a big inhale. With the exhale, the right hand can go to hip or thigh, but there's barely any weight. Yeah. And then come back to center. You can bring your hands down or you can stay lifted. You're going to slide that foot and knee back in and just do a little rock. Yeah. Great. Okay, other side. Remember, the hip part's an option. So you can do the lateral without the hips. You can bring your hands down to extend the leg. Or you can shift weight into the shin to extend. And then tune in. You might enjoy the foot being flat. You might enjoy the foot being flexed and the heel down, or opening up the hip by rotating. Thigh. Micro bend the knee. You'll see how mine wants to hyperextend. Not great for the joint. Inhale the arms up. With the exhale, create a little side body stretch. Yeah. Ooh, did you guys hear that pop? was my hip. It was loud. Okay, so that left hand can come down and go to the hip or the thigh. It was a good hip. Good hip hop. One full breath. That's it. Now use your core. Squeeze in to come back to center. Good. You can bring your hands down or stay lifted, but we're going to bring the knee back in and just do a little rock. Great. Okay. Bring the hands down. You can sit to the side. We're going to bring the legs all the way around to the front. The blanket is our friend today. We're going to fold it. So instead of rolling it, it may look like this. You're going to fold it in once and then one more time. So it's kind of like a burrito, but we just flattened it out. And place it behind you. And you're going to lift your hips up and bring them on top of your blanket. Now, what's key here is that we're not just sitting directly on top. We're actually going to kind of shuffle forward a little bit until you feel your sit bones are barely on the front edge of the blanket. And then once you find that, re-extend your legs. So what that does is it just tilts the pelvis a little bit, right? So that maybe your low back can sit up straighter versus when the pelvis is tucked underneath and the low back can't sit straight. So we tend to overstretch around the sacrum or the SI joints. Use your inhale to sit up as tall as you can, and then with your exhale, hinge forward just an inch or two. So you start to feel the length of the hamstrings, the stretch. Take one more breath. And with your inhale, sit up tall. You're going to take your left hand and cross it over to the outside of that right thigh or the knee. Take your right hand down behind you. Use the inhale to sit up tall, and with your exhale, rotate your chest just a little bit to the right. That's it. Now, instead of using the hands as leverage, which is what I tend to do, I want you to let your hands be light here so the core is doing the work. Then, take the right hand and place it behind the head. Wrap your elbow forward towards your right temple. Yeah, so that way we're not using the shoulder to try and twist. Reach up through the crown of the head and imagine that the back of the head could just kind of lean into your hand a tiny bit. So we're just getting a little bit more extension in the spine. And then rotate with your heart and not with your right elbow. Rotate your chest maybe a tiny bit more. Good, and then release it. Come back to center, release the hands down. Place the hands behind you. You can be on your fingertips or you can flatten your palms. Draw the shoulder blades in towards the spine. You're stretching the front of the chest and take an inhale. And then with your exhale, you can kind of push off of the hands, come back to center. Take your right hand and sweep it across to the outside of the thigh or the knee. Your left hand is back behind you. Inhale to sit up tall, and with your exhale, rotate your chest to the left. Now when we rotate the spine, we want to try to move from the middle and the upper back, not the low back. Now use your core so we can free up that left hand. Take the hand behind the head. Wrap the elbow around towards the temple. Yeah. And what we're trying to do is extend from the tailbone to the crown of the head. So you're going to reach up and then maybe rotate the chest a tiny bit more. And release. Come back around to the front. Take the hands back behind you. You can be on your fingertips or you can flatten the palms. Draw the shoulder blades in towards the spine and lift the chest. Try to line the crown of the head up with the rest of the spine. So for me, that means I'm going to look up a little bit more. Then use an exhale, you can kind of push off with the hands to come back to center. You're going to shift forward. So we're coming to the front of the mat. And then bring the blanket around. Let's now make it nice and long. So I'm going to open it up. And we'll make a really long burrito. So funny story, when I first moved to Austin, I had no idea what a burrito was. And my first job here was in a Tex-Mex restaurant. And I'd have to ask the manager every day, what is a burrito? What is a taco? Which is crazy. So when I first heard make a burrito out of your blanket, I was like, what? All my worlds collided. Yoga, Tex-Mex. Okay. So you're going to take the blanket, bring the soles of the feet together and place the blanket on top of the feet. And then wrap it underneath your thighs here. And you may find that once you lower down, you actually want more support. Like maybe this blanket isn't enough and you want to block underneath your knee. So there's an option for that. We're going to place the hands behind and then start to lower down. And as you tune in, we want to feel as though the inner hip muscles are lengthened, they're stretched, right? But the blanket or your block is supporting the leg so that we're not at that end range of our capability, like in range of motion or in range of movement, right? When we go to our end range, then the muscles know. They're like, oop, this is the end. We need to start contracting, right? Out of preservation, out of safety. So the muscles start to contract or shorten. So we want to support the knees at that right spot where the muscles can relax. No contraction. And then once you find that spot, you'll bring your awareness to the breath. I like to bend the elbows and let the elbows rest on the ground. Take the palms and rest them on the rib cage. It allows me to feel the breath. And if I'm truly breathing deeply, because when you are, you'll feel your rib cage really expand. And take one more breath here. Now, if you're enjoying, this is our last inner hip opener. If you're enjoying this, you can keep the legs just as they are. If you've had enough, you can use your hands outside of the thighs to kind of help the knees come back together. Just leave the blanket where it is and heel toe your feet to hip width distance. So either stay in that Supta Baddha Konasana or plant the feet on the floor with the knees pointing towards the ceiling. And we'll reach our arms up to the ceiling, take right elbow on top of left, and just give yourself a hug. You'll feel the shoulder blades separating. There's a little space in the upper back. Now take the breath into that space. So as you inhale, we're really expanding the rib cage, but what you'll feel is your shoulder blades separating. Like you're expanding the wings of the upper back. And you'll open the arms wide towards the ceiling and just switch it out. Opposite elbow on top. Give yourself a hug. Use your inhale to create space in the upper back. And then inhale, arms open wide to the ceiling. And then release the arms down. If you're still in Supta Baddha Konasana, take the hands to the outside of the knees and draw the knees together. Yeah. Just pause there for a breath. Now you're going to keep your right heel on the floor, but flex the foot. So you're lifting the sole of the foot and the toes. So right heel is still pushing into the floor, but the sole of the foot lifts. With your exhale, push your left foot actively into the floor until you feel your left thigh muscles engage. And then with the next exhale, engage the core muscles and pick your right foot up to hover. Your foot is kind of hooked around the blanket if the blanket is still there. If not, no big deal. Right? And then release that right foot down. Now push your left heel into the floor. Lift the sole of the foot and the toes. Push your right foot, the whole foot, into the floor until you feel the thigh muscles engage. And then pick your left foot up to hover. You'll feel your core working. Yeah, and then release it down. So you can continue to do one side and then the other. Or if there was no strain in the low back or the hip flexors, the creases of your hips, you're going to push both heels down, lift the soles of the feet and the toes, use an exhale to draw the low belly in, and then pick the feet up to hover. Right, so one foot at a time or both. Take another breath wherever you are. And then release the feet down. If the blanket's in the way, you can just use one of your feet to slide the blanket off the mat. Take your left ankle on top of the right thigh. Option to stay as you are. Option to push the right heel down, and then just like you did before, draw the low belly in and pick your right foot up to hover. And you might like this work that is happening in the inner hip. And when I say inner, I mean like hip flexors on the right side. But maybe instead you want to wrap your hands around the back of the right thigh to support it. Or grab your strap and wrap it around the back of the right thigh to support the leg. Right, so lots of options. The foot can stay on the ground, the foot can hover with a lot of work for your hip flexors, or you can use your hands to hug the legs in. Now, wherever you are in this, you're going to take the whole unit of your legs and you're going to lean to the right a few inches and then come back to center. So you move your hips and your legs to the right a few inches and then back to center. Yeah, and so now we're starting to open up the outer hip. And if you're enjoying that movement and the hands are supporting the right leg, you might instead take your arms out into like a T or goalpost. And that's going to give you the ability to take your legs a little more to the right, which might increase the outer hip stretch. Good. Next time you come back to center, release. Plant the right foot down, release the left. Extend your right leg out straight just to give, ooh, that feels good, the hip flexor a break and allow it to lengthen. So right leg straight on the ground. Take a breath. And you'll rebend the right knee. Now take right ankle on top of left thigh. Check in. Maybe this side is feeling a little stickier, right? So we'll keep the left foot on the ground if that's the case. You're wanting to pick up the foot, you're going to push the heel down, engage the core, and then slowly pick the left foot up. And you can stay just like that. So you'll feel how your right ankle is pushing into that left thigh. The left thigh is kind of pushing back. And that's what triggers or turns on the hip flexors, the front of the thigh, the quads. Option to interlace the fingers or use a strap behind the thigh to support the leg. Then we'll just do a little bit of movement. You're going to take your legs over to the left and then back to center. And over to the left and back to center. And if that feels good and your left foot is hovering, you might take your arms out into a T shape or bent elbows so that you have more space to take your legs to the left and back to center. Last breath here. Good. We'll come back to center. Release the left foot down. Plant the right foot. Extend your left leg out straight and let your leg get heavy. And then extend both legs out straight. Bring the arms down along the sides of the body. Bend the elbows and let your hands rest on the low part of the rib cage. Take a moment to tune in. If there's any other movement you feel would benefit your practice, allow your body to rest in our final shape with more ease, then start to find that movement. Maybe it's hugging the knees into the chest and doing some circles. Maybe it's happy baby. And then know that when we do a lot of hip work, because of the way that the pelvis is connected to the low back by way of the sacrum and the SI joints, your low back might feel a little tender. Sometimes mine will feel a little tight. So you can use, your blanket in whatever way will allow you to feel more relaxed and more supported. So it could be you roll up your blanket and you use it like restorative fish, where the blanket goes underneath the spine and you're in a very subtle back bend. Or maybe, Linda, I would say roll the blanket up and place it underneath your knees so you have the opposite, right? Your low back kind of sinks to the floor. And in fact, if you have lots of props, you could take 2 blocks and stack them tall and then place a bolster on top, and then your knees would go on top of this bolster, the back of the knees. I forgot what we call this. Maybe it's Stonehenge. So your choice. And again, if lying in Shavasana doesn't feel right for you in this moment, you could take legs up the wall or come into seated meditation. And take a moment to settle in. And we'll take the biggest breath in possible. And an audible sigh. Let your breath find its natural rhythm. So in yoga philosophy, dating back to the Upanishads, long time ago, there is an outline of the body, the whole body, referring to the physical body, is Annamaya Kosha. Anna means like matter, food. Maya means made of, and Kosha means layer. So this layer that's made of matter, this physical layer. To Pranamaya Kosha, prana is the breath, energy. Manamaya Kosha, mana is mind. Vijnanamaya Kosha is the place of intuition. Some call it the emotional body. And then Ananda Maya Kosha. Most closely reflects who we are, and it's experienced in those moments where we feel a sense of contentment, peace. So we work with the physical body in a way that allows us to work with these other layers, because all of these layers are permeable. So you imagine that when you're experiencing something mentally or emotionally, the body responds. When you're angry, maybe the body tightens, you make fists, you clench the jaw, the brow. When you're sad, you might kind of curl in and the shoulders get droopy. I want you to move your awareness down to the soles of the feet and just tune in to the sensations you're experiencing. Do they feel more relaxed? Do they feel more awake, more open? Are there places that feel tight, tender? And when you find places that feel a little restricted, that feel tight or tense, imagine that you can wrap your inhale around that space, whether it's very physical, like a muscle, or more energetic. And as you exhale, imagine the tension leaving the body. And then when you're ready, you're going to move your awareness up. So you take your time working your way from the soles of the feet all the way up to the crown of the head. And spend a little extra time in those places where you know you tend to hold stress, or you know there tends to be tightness for various physical reasons. Keep wrapping the inhale around and then exhale to release. Again and again and again. Keeping your body relaxed. You haven't made your way all the way up to the top of the head. Take just a couple more breaths to do so. Now imagine that you could fill all of those spaces with an energy or a quality that serves you. So maybe it's health of the body. Maybe it's ease. Maybe it's peace. Whatever serves you in this moment. Take a few breaths and imagine filling up. Filling up from the soles of the feet to the top of the head. Filling up in the space of the heart, the space of the mind. With the next inhale, you're going to pause at the top of the inhale. And then an audible exhale. And find a little bit of movement. You can wiggle the fingers, the toes. In your own time, if you're lying in Shavasana, you can stretch your arms and your legs. Eventually you'll bend your knees and roll to your side. And you'll take your time to make your way to a comfortable seat. No rush. We'll just take a moment, bring the palms together, let the thumbs rest on the chest. It takes a lot to carve out this time in the day to tend to our bodies, minds, and hearts. And offer you this moment to be grateful. You have the ability to do this. Being grateful for your body that allowed you to move through this practice. And of course, grateful for this community as we share this time, our energy in this practice. I'm going to close with the sound of Om. You can listen or chant on your end. Allow this Om to carry the energy of our practice into our day. Big inhale. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for sharing your practice.